We are the Magolide Collective, an artistic duo formed in 2019. We are digital alchemists concerned with the transformation of matter into images. Academic writing, broader global histories, and cultural events inform our artistic practice along with the rewriting of the narrative of the African body and continent and marginalized bodies. Contemporary issues such as identity, race, and gender are part of our discourse, our mediums, our performance, and digital art.
Modernism is our point of departure. Disseminating and decolonizing forms of artistic production and curation is pivotal to our practice. This process was initiated by exploring our stance and work in relation to Western masters' narratives. It became clear that there is an array of historical bias in the manner in which art history is written. This sparked a thought process that would attempt to unravel, change, and challenge, and bring awareness to these skewed perceptions. It was further amplified when we came across a game theorized by Griselda Pollock, a game defined as the avant-garde gambit of reference, deference, and difference. A game, when played with the African context, can create space for voices and practices often excluded by the regimes of power within the art world.
We asked ourselves a series of questions. How is this game played? What are the rules? And what does it look like when we decide to participate in it? To be honest, we as a collective aren't quite sure. However, we sense we're on the right track when answering some of these questions. For example, it could look like a reinterpretation of Wall eating a hamburger, a guerrilla installation at the Wits Art Museum, an animated parody of William Kentridge's Felix in Exile, a defacing of a white cube's walls, or a reinterpretation of Paul Viola's Emergence.
Our discussion today will focus on the latter, as it was featured in our 2019 exhibition titled The Counterspace of Pop Culture in Zaire at a project space called the Mixed Reality Workshop in Johannesburg, South Africa. This exhibition, in hindsight, spoke to a number of concerns raised within the panel discussion abstract. We will be discussing how this show expanded on the problematic issues we associate with the art world, both within our context as well as within the context of African modalities, and subsequently how we have, as a collective, set out to play this avant-garde game through the curation and production of an exhibition.
The title, Counterspace of Pop Culture in Zaire, addresses a multitude of elements which speak to omitted African histories and narratives, and the act of rewriting and reinserting said African histories and narratives into the center of the contemporary landscape of the future. Essentially, it's broken down into three components. Number one, our definition of the counterspace occupies the intersection of the new space held by digital technologies and innovation as an artistic medium, whilst questioning old traditions and the visual language of art. This was a significant part of the show in which we used 21st century mediums such as virtual reality and other forms of 3D software, which was juxtaposed to traditional methods of art making.
Number two, pop culture is an aesthetic language which exists as a cultural transmitter of information through mass media. Aimed particularly at a younger target group, emerging from the 60s and 70s, popular culture was constructed as a Western framework which strove to pioneer a social and cultural construct of change through the use of media. We use pop culture images as a tool to break down and overturn the complex ideas and concepts engaged within the show.
Number three, as South African cultural producers, Zaire, and more specifically the semiotics surrounding Zaire 74 and Rumble in the Jungle, represent an integral part of African history and narratives. It presents an immensely contested history and cultural landmark. Zaire is a known space of violent atrocities, dictatorship, repression, pillaging of resources, as well as a place that breeds the loss of the African body. This was instigated by Mobutu Sese Seko and Western forces, but in contrast, crucial cultural events took place in Zaire, whether that be in regards to sport, art, theatrical performance, or film. We use some of these histories and known cultural contexts of Zaire as a reference point to address complex intersectional narratives of representation, identity, sociopolitics, and lived experiences of the land. In so doing, we discovered intersectional histories of cultural icons whom we pay tribute to in our work.
We as a collective value collaboration, and if our time spent with the history of Western modernism has taught us anything, it is that the notion of authorship is a loaded gun. We say this because we as a collective are mindful of the manner in which Western art history has a tendency to esteem the individual in complete isolation from society from which they garnered inspiration, critique, or technical traits. This value system is problematic since successful art show is not merely achieved by an individual, but rather as a collective force.
Rafisa Asmal, Vincent Baloyi, and Gabriel Bard collaborated with Magolide for this exhibition. They enacted and performed crucial roles as different characters in a reimagining of Africa's omitted histories and representations.
With regards to Vincent Baloyi and our collaboration with him, we intended to create, curate, and direct works and shows that herald a call for the insertion of forgotten and omitted Black modernists. would like that convention evident throughout art history to be overturned. His work was an important contribution to the show, as Vincent's work speaks conceptually to the idea of omitted histories and significant contribution made to art history. We worked with Vincent to ensure that he is reinserted and re-established in the South African art history and discourse. Our partnership with Vincent is that we as a collective feel is crucial for our practice, as his insight surrounding modernism in South Africa sparks a dynamic conversation between his work and ours.
This relationship stemmed from a desire to dissect the manner in which archives are constructed and to investigate the contribution that archives make to an artist's career. Vincent Baloyi was born on the 4th of February 1954, 6 years after apartheid was legalized in South Africa. Due to the socio-political and economic impact of apartheid, Vincent, along with his work, was systematically victimized and discriminated against under a racially oppressive and authoritarian society. When work did sell, it was usually for incredibly underappreciated prices, only to be flipped for thousands at an auction house. Hence, we launched our exploration of Vincent's life and archive.
The more we dug up, the more we realized Vincent Baloyi's name is rarely mentioned in the conversation about South African art history. His work was exhibited at the Louvre Museum, and he worked alongside internationally acclaimed artists such as Edward Villa and Simhlengetwa. His timeline and geographical location throughout his career places him as a peer of these artists. He produced work of a similar caliber, and he's positioned him among a collective of modernists performing avant-garde gambit crucial to the art history landscape of South Africa. In our opinion, his contribution to the modernist in South Africa, as well as the cultural landscape, was overlooked and fell to the background of South African history.
For this exhibition, Vincent Baloyi joined the conversation with a series of metal sculptures bought from found scrap car parts. We collaborated with Vincent on a series of metal sculptures in which his conceptual and technical mastery of sculpture as a medium conversed with our performance video and 3D printed sculptures. A series of Vincent's clay sculptures were exhibited on plinths outside Tomorrow Gallery. It is important to note that, as luck would have it, this exhibition ran in conjunction with Vertical Presence, the sculpture of Eduardo Villa. Eduardo Villa is often heralded as an innovator in South African art. His work is in notable collections and is installed outside many major galleries and corporate buildings in South Africa. Villa's sculptures were littered throughout the atrium of Keys Art Mall, and we decided to exhibit a series of clay sculptures Vincent had produced outside amongst these sculptures as a curatorial gesture, which pinned Vincent within the life and the work of Eduardo Villa. Again, to demonstrate that Vincent Baloyi's name should be included in conversations about Eduardo Villa, Simhlengetwa, Rorke's Drift, and other crucial aspects of South African art history.
Besides the sculptural element of the show, the residing work was rooted in the realm of performance. We believe performance art to be a crucial tool in shifting perspective on monolithic histories. Performance does not require canvas, expensive oil paints, objects to be cast in bronze, nor anything else that renders art financially exclusive. One simply needs to be present within oneself when the body is the medium. Two characters as a collective we assume throughout all of our work are featured, the black body and the colonial bard.
The colonial bard was inspired by Brett Murray's Africa, a sculpture that caused great controversy among South Africans who found it offensive to West Africans. The conception of colonial bard, or the use of a Bart Simpson mask, comes from an inherent resentment we harbor towards a majority of white post-apartheid South African artists who use the language and guise of resistance art to position and assert their value conceptually, technically, and as a byproduct monetarily in the canon of South African art history. In Murray's case, this is further problematicized by an exhibition he did in 2012 titled Hail to the Thief, a show which overtly parodied and shifted the meaning behind a number of prolific Medu Arts Ensemble protest posters, without credit to the original artists. Bart serves as a symbol of benefactors of whiteness within the art world.
The black body is a character of cultural representation that functions as both an object and a subject. This character exists as a critique of the stereotypical signs associated with blackness within contemporary media, society, and even with the historical archive. Whilst drawing from these notions of representation, we aim to overturn them by redefining the black body in position of power, insurrections, and subsequently art historical significance within a contemporary zeitgeist. The black body is almost always the central figure in our performance, and this is done as an instrument of coded confrontation. The black body as a character aims to subvert what is expected of it within performance, where it is placed and what is decided to differ from in regards to its positioning within art historical canons. This character strives to overturn what is expected of blackness within the framing of contemporary art. Oliver, in reference to performance artists such as William Pope Al, Tamika Norris, and Sherman Fleming, states that the action presented by these artists over a 40-year period demonstrates that the black body as a raw material continues to be charged with the ability to provoke, to elicit and reflect, and at times presents humor. The motive of the black body draws ideological segments from the aforementioned artist, as it strives to center itself within a body of work.
The fact that this character is embodied by a performer in a black latex bodysuit, essentially rendered unidentifiable, compels the audience to view the performance as a metaphor comprised of something much larger. Oliver's reflections on William Pope Bell, Tamika Norris, and Sherman Fleming becomes important once more in relation to what we as a collective strive to implement in our work. She states, "Their work compels the viewer to consider who the artist is, not what he or she is, presenting a body that resists subjugation and refuses to be flattened into a monolith."
Emergence A Frivola video performance is a video that consists of 11 minutes of stop-motion animation, built and executed in Google Tilt Brush. It is a room-scale 3D painting virtual reality application. This video merges the tradition and conceptual visual language of art and the innovation technology of virtual and augmented realities. In it, we explore the intersections of performance art and its residues.
Our video, Emergence Afri Viola, differs from Viola as it is deliberately sped up in contrast to his slowed-down version. He considers the meaning of contemplation by slowing down the video in order to allow the viewers to experience the emotions of the actors. In this performance, the black body, wearing boxing gloves, are lifted out of a marble cistern housed within a tomb. Two women, both dressed in shweshwe dresses and colonial military coats, are seen on either side of the cistern. They aid the black body out of the cistern and onto the ground, fetching a boxing gown and laying it over the black body. This signifies mourning. This act is looped for 11 minutes as reference to a performance that is in constant time loop throughout which poetry, that speaks of the lived experiences of the colonized body, takes center stage.
The performance aims to overturn the convention of the white messiah in Western art history. It also aims to explore how Black African identity was stripped, stolen, and reappropriated, used as a mouthpiece of the West colonial propaganda. Religion is used as a tool of oppression and enslavement. This created an omission of African knowledge systems and histories, which in turn created subverted systems of pseudoscience and global humanistic knowledge.
The Egyptian statue seen in the center of the tomb is that of Queen Nefertiti, which was stolen by the Germans in 1913 through fraudulent documents. The semiotics which surround these sculptures' history is fascinating to us, as the sculpture was allegedly supposed to be returned in 1935, but Hitler decided against it. Egypt has been campaigning for decades for Germany to return the statue. Germany continues to profit greatly from Nefertiti as the figure draws millions of museum visitors annually. This statue alludes to a general theme of colonial dictatorship and exploitation. This too is found to be true with regards to the other artifacts used throughout the show, such as the Benin ivory mask and the Bangwa Queen sculpture from Cameroon.
Replicating these stolen artifacts in our video piece, artifacts which are only visible in European museums, hints to the fact that these animated objects aren't really the original artifacts. In essence, this speaks to the larger dilemma of stolen artifacts and mineral resources of African continent, which were and still are pillaged and stolen in the name of anthropological and cultural preservation. This enriches and benefits only the Western institutions and affects socio-political and economical standing in the global system. The imprisonment of these busts, and many others like it, is still a contentious issue that exists currently. The West enforces its role as a bastion of safekeeping over the stolen cultural objects.
The counterspace of pop culture in Zaire aimed to establish a connection between these thinkers, writers, and artists as a way of drawing a conceptual and comparative analysis of the manner in which we think we are dismantling histories of modernism and art histories, bringing forward a mode of practice that is decolonial in theory. The conception of our motifs, references, and symbols invoke the notion surrounding Griselda Pollock's definition of modernism as a game of reference, deference, and difference, a game in which we as a collective have embraced as a form of artistic decree, a game in which we think could be used to pull to pieces the problematic monolithic history still pervasively controlling the art world today. We hope this talk has aided in establishing theoretical natures of our practice and the manner in which we have come to determine what constitutes decolonial art promulgation in a South African contemporary zeitgeist.